This is True Crime Stories for Sleep. The story of wealth and power has always fascinated humanity, but when it's forged in the shadows of crime, it takes on a different kind of allure, one that smells of danger, ambition, and blood. Around the world, there have been men and women who amassed fortunes not through innovation or inheritance, but through empires of vice and violence. This is the richest criminals in history, a deep dive into the lives of those who turned the underworld into gold mines. And no name looms larger over that world than the man who once ruled an empire so vast it rivaled nations, Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria. Before we dive into this tale of money, murder, and madness, take a moment to subscribe, like, and comment where you're listening from. We're traveling across decades and continents to uncover the fortunes built on fear and power, and your engagement keeps this series alive. Now, let's begin with the man who called himself El Patron, the king of cocaine. He was born in Rio Negro, Colombia, in December 1949, the son of a humble farmer and a schoolteacher. In those early years, nothing hinted that the boy with the curious eyes and sharp smile would one day become one of the richest and most feared men alive. But Pablo Escobar was never ordinary. From childhood, he was restless, ambitious, and drawn to risk. While other kids dreamt of soccer and fame, he dreamed of wealth. Unimaginable, unshakable wealth. By his teenage years, Escobar was already dabbling in petty crime. He sold stolen tombstones, smuggled cigarettes, and dealt in fake lottery tickets. He wasn't content with small-time hustling, though. He saw the poverty around him, and vowed he would never be poor again. The streets of Medellin became his classroom, and he studied the art of power with ruthless efficiency. In the early 1970s, when cocaine began flowing from the jungles of South America into the veins of the United States, Escobar saw his opportunity. It started with small shipments, carried through airstrips carved into the Colombian wilderness. But the profits were beyond anything he'd ever imagined. A single kilo of cocaine that cost a few $1,000s to produce could sell for tens of thousands in Miami. Escobar built networks, recruited pilots, and bought politicians. Within a few years, he wasn't just moving drugs, he was building an empire. By the mid-1980s, the Medellin cartel, under Escobar's command, was supplying as much as 80% of the world's cocaine. Planes, submarines, and even fleets of boats ferried his product across oceans. The cash poured in faster than he could count it, literally. It's said that his accountants spent thousands of dollars each month just on rubber bands to bundle stacks of US bills. Rats ate millions of dollars stored in warehouses. The cartel made so much money that Escobar reportedly wrote off $2 billion a year as spoilage, due to loss, decay, or theft. But it wasn't just money that Escobar sought, it was power. He bought it with generosity and fear in equal measure. In Medellin, he built housing projects, soccer fields, and schools. To the poor, he was a hero, Robin Hood Paisa, the man who gave back. People adored him, painted his face on walls, and whispered his name with reverence. Yet, to the government and anyone who stood in his way, he was a monster, unpredictable, violent, and unstoppable. His empire functioned like a nation. He employed thousands, smugglers, accountants, assassins, pilots, lawyers. He built a private zoo, imported giraffes, hippos, and elephants, and constructed the legendary Hacienda Napoles, a sprawling estate with its own runway and bullring. It was both a palace and a fortress, a symbol of the untouchable life he had built. But Escobar's obsession with legitimacy was his downfall. He wanted to be more than a criminal. He wanted to be a politician, a man of influence in Colombia's future. In 1982, he actually won a seat as an alternate member of Colombia's Congress. For a brief, surreal period, one of the richest criminals on earth walked the halls of government as a respected figure. But that illusion didn't last long. Journalists and rival politicians began exposing his ties to the drug trade. When a fearless journalist, Guillermo Cano, denounced him publicly, Escobar had him assassinated, an act that turned the press and the state irrevocably against him. From there, his war with the government escalated into open violence. Judges, police officers, and ministers fell victim to his plata o plomo, Rule, silver or lead. Take the bribe, or take the bullet. Car bombs rocked Bogota. The streets of Medellin ran red. Escobar became an enemy of the state, but also a symbol of its weakness. No one dared cross him, not even the president. At the height of his power, Escobar's net worth exceeded $30 billion. Adjusted for inflation, it would be nearly double today. Forbes listed him among the richest men in the world, a surreal acknowledgement of criminal wealth on a legitimate platform. He owned mansions in Miami, apartments in New York, and estates hidden deep in Colombia's countryside. His reach stretched across continents, his name known from Miami to Madrid, but his empire couldn't last forever. The pressure mounted from all sides: the Colombian military, rival cartels, and most importantly, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA. America wanted Escobar brought to justice, and Colombia, under immense international pressure, began cooperating. His once loyal allies started turning on him, cutting deals and selling information for safety. In 1991, facing overwhelming force, Escobar struck a deal with the Colombian government. He agreed to surrender, but on his terms. In an audacious move that stunned the world, Escobar built his own prison, La Catedral. It was less a prison than a private resort, complete with a soccer field, bar, jacuzzi, and telephone lines. Guards obeyed him. He continued to run his empire from within its walls. But when he murdered 2 cartel members inside La Catedral, the government tried to move him. Escobar escaped before they arrived, vanishing into the hills of Antioquia. For the next 16 months, he was the most wanted man in the world. The search bloc, a joint Colombian, U.S. task force, hunted him relentlessly. His communication was monitored. His family watched. On December 2, 1993, Escobar made a fateful mistake. He called his son, Juan Pablo, from a safe house in Medellin. The call was traced. Police and military units surrounded the building. In a final burst of chaos, Escobar tried to flee across the rooftop, barefoot, gun in hand. Moments later, he was gunned down. The photo of his lifeless body, bloated, bloodied, lying beside his pistol, became one of the most infamous images of the 20th century. Medellin erupted in grief. Thousands attended his funeral, weeping as though a saint had died. To the poor, he had been their protector. To the state, he was a plague finally purged. Yet even in death, Pablo Escobar's fortune and legend endured. Much of his wealth was never recovered. Stories persist of hidden cash buried in fields and walls, some of it still being unearthed today. His estate crumbled, his zoo fell into ruin, but his myth survived, immortalized in film, television, and music. Escobar's legacy is one of contradictions, charity and cruelty, brilliance and brutality, power and paranoia. He built an empire so vast it reshaped nations, and died chasing an illusion of control. He was a king who ruled with fear, a billionaire born of chaos, and the man who showed the world that the line between legend and infamy is paper-thin. In the deserts of northwestern Mexico, where the heat shimmers like glass and the roads stretch endlessly through dust and scrub, a boy named Joaquin Archivaldo Guzman Lora was born into poverty. His family lived in La Tuna, a remote village in Sinaloa, where fields of maize and poppies grew side by side and survival depended on both. His father was said to cultivate opium poppies and sell the resin to middlemen. Young Joaquin learned early that crime wasn't an aberration, it was an economy. The nickname, El Chapo, meaning Shorty, came later, a reference to his small frame. But there was nothing small about his ambition. As a teenager, Guzman began selling oranges and marijuana on village roads, and by the time he reached his 20s, he made contacts with regional traffickers. He was sharp, quiet, and completely loyal, qualities that caught the eye of Héctor Luis Palma and later Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, the powerful founder of the Guadalajara cartel. Guzman wasn't content to stay a runner for long. He watched how the bosses moved, how the money flowed, and how violence enforced obedience. When Gallardo's empire collapsed in the late 1980s, splintered by arrests and rivalries, El Chapo seized his moment. From the ashes rose the Sinaloa cartel, and Guzman positioned himself at its center. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Cocaine demand in the United States was still booming, and new synthetic drugs were beginning to enter the market. Guzman saw what others didn't. Logistics could be an art form. He wasn't just a trafficker. He was an engineer of distribution. He built a network of tunnels, stretching from Mexico into Arizona, Texas, and California, underground arteries lined with rails and ventilation, invisible to border patrols. Above ground, his men concealed drugs and produced trucks, oil tankers, and even cans of jalapenos. Each shipment moved with military precision, timed down to the minute. He bribed police, customs agents, and military officers to look the other way. And if money didn't work, bullets did. By the early 2000s, the Sinaloa cartel had become a multinational operation, trafficking billions of dollars worth of cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin each year. Guzman's power reached across continents. He had suppliers in Colombia, chemists in Mexico, distributors in Chicago and New York, and bankers who laundered profits through offshore accounts. Forbes estimated his wealth at around $1 billion, but insiders believed the true figure was many times higher. His fortune wasn't just in cash, it was in influence. Yet, despite the global scale, Guzman operated with the instincts of a man who never forgot the hills of Sinaloa. He was careful, paranoid, and loyal only to those who proved themselves. To his followers, he was El Señor, the protector who paid for villages' electricity, built schools, and handed out food during droughts. Like Escobar before him, Guzman crafted an image that blurred the line between outlaw and benefactor. In Sinaloa, his name was spoken with both fear and reverence. But with wealth came attention. In 1993, a shootout in Guadalajara's airport, intended for rivals, left a beloved cardinal dead. The outrage forced the Mexican government to act. El Chapo was arrested in Guatemala and extradited back to Mexico, where he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Many thought it was the end of his reign. It was not. From his cell in Puente Grande, Guzman continued running the cartel. Guards were bribed, phones smuggled in, orders delivered. Money flowed out of the prison as easily as it flowed in. 2001. After nearly a decade behind bars, El Chapo escaped, hidden inside a laundry cart. It was a legend in the making, the man who could buy his way out of anywhere. The story rippled through Mexico like a whispered prophecy. His return to the outside world wasn't a retreat, it was a conquest. Under his renewed command, Sinaloa expanded aggressively. He took over routes from rivals, struck deals with Colombian suppliers, and invested in meth production labs that turned rural Mexico into a chemical hub. His men fought a brutal war against the Tijuana, Juarez, and Beltran-Leyva cartels. The streets ran red. Between 2006 and 2012, tens of thousands died in what came to be known as Mexico's drug war, a conflict fueled by cartels that operated like armies. El Chapo's empire was resilient because it wasn't just built on violence. It was built on systems. Each region had lieutenants, accountants, and logistics managers. Each smuggling corridor was mapped, guarded, and constantly updated. His fleet of planes and submarines carried shipments across oceans. Every dollar was tracked, laundered, reinvested. He treated the cartel as a corporation, with himself as CEO. The Mexican government and USDA hunted him relentlessly. They tapped phones, followed relatives, and raided safe houses, but Guzman always slipped away. He changed locations constantly, sometimes hiding in mountain caves, sometimes in ranches protected by villagers loyal to him. Rumors said he bathed in rivers to avoid leaving chemical traces for helicopters' infrared sensors. He survived assassination attempts, ambushes, and double crosses. For years, it seemed as though El Chapo was untouchable. In February 2014, the illusion shattered. Acting on a tip, Mexican Marines raided a seaside condominium in Mazatlan. They found El Chapo asleep beside his wife and twin daughters. He was arrested without a shot fired. Cameras captured his face as he was led away in handcuffs, expression unreadable, as if he already knew this wouldn't be the end. And it wasn't. In July 2015, Guzman escaped again. this time through a mile-long tunnel dug directly into his prison shower stall. It had been equipped with lights, ventilation, and a modified motorcycle on rails to speed his getaway. The sheer audacity of it stunned the world. The operation had taken months and cost millions. His men had tracked the prison's blueprints, bought land nearby, and drilled their way in undetected. It was the kind of feat that made him both a myth and a menace. But myths can only survive so long. After months on the run, Guzman was cornered again in January 2016 in Los Mochis, Sinaloa. He tried to escape through a storm drain, wading through filthy water, but emerged into the sight of soldiers. This time, there would be no tunnel, no bribe, no second escape. He was extradited to the United States the following year. His 2019 trial in Brooklyn revealed the scale of his operation. Billions laundered through shell companies, tons of drugs smuggled into American cities, entire police units bought off with cash. Witnesses described private planes, luxury mansions, and assassinations ordered with a word. The U.S. government called him the most powerful drug trafficker in the world. When the sentence came, life imprisonment plus 30 years, Guzman stared straight ahead, silent. His fortune was scattered, seized, hidden, or absorbed by successors. His legend, however, endured. Even today, in the mountains of Sinaloa, people tell stories of El Chapo, the boy who grew up barefoot and built an empire under the noses of nations, the man who believed he could tunnel through walls and borders alike. From a small village to the world stage, Joaquin Guzman Loera proved that wealth born of crime is not only a measure of money but of power, the kind that can make governments tremble. Yet in the end, even the Lord of the Tunnels found that no escape lasts forever. In the roaring 1920s, when jazz echoed from speakeasies and the glitter of urban America masked deep moral contradictions, one name came to define the very essence of organized crime: Alphonse, Al Capone. His empire was born from the law meant to purify America: Prohibition. When the United States outlawed the sale and manufacture of alcohol in 1920, it did not eliminate the thirst, it only handed it to men like Capone, who saw opportunity in the chaos of moral reform. Capone was not born into luxury. He came into the world in 1899 in Brooklyn, New York, the son of poor Italian immigrants. His father was a barber, his mother a seamstress. Life was a struggle, and the streets of Brooklyn were as much a classroom as any school. Young Al learned quickly that respect came not from rules but from toughness. He dropped out of school after hitting a teacher and joined a gang called the 5 Points Gang, a notorious organization that trained many future mobsters. At the age of 19, he worked as a bouncer at the Harvard Inn, a bar owned by mobster Frankie Yale. It was there he earned his famous nickname, Scarface. After insulting a woman, her brother slashed his face with a knife, leaving 3 permanent scars. Capone carried that mark for life but learned an invaluable lesson: violence had to be measured, never reckless. It was this mix of charm and brutality that would define him. When Prohibition arrived, it turned the criminal world upside down. Smuggling, bootlegging, and speakeasies exploded into a multi-billion-dollar underground economy. Capone followed his mentor Yale's advice and moved to Chicago to work for Johnny Torrio, another major figure in the bootlegging business. Torrio saw potential in the young man's ruthlessness and intelligence. Together they built a network that distributed illegal liquor throughout the city. But ambition never sleeps. After Torrio was seriously wounded in an assassination attempt, he retired and handed control to Capone. In his mid-20s, Al Capone became the undisputed boss of the Chicago outfit, a criminal organization that dominated everything from alcohol smuggling to gambling and prostitution. He transformed it into a business empire generating over $100 million annually, a staggering sum for the time, equivalent to more than $1.5 billion today. Capone ruled Chicago with a strange duality. He cultivated an image of a businessman and benefactor. He opened soup kitchens during the Great Depression, handed out Christmas gifts to poor children, and donated to charities. The press dubbed him Public Enemy #1, but others called him Robin Hood. He dressed impeccably in custom suits, smoked Cuban cigars, and dined in the best restaurants. Reporters loved him, and he loved the attention. He once said, "I'm just a businessman, giving the people what they want." What he gave them was liquor and bloodshed. Chicago became a battlefield as rival gangs fought for control of the city's lucrative routes. Capone's organization was vast and disciplined. He paid off politicians, police officers, and judges, ensuring protection from law enforcement. Anyone who couldn't be bought was eliminated. He understood fear as currency. Loyalty was purchased with either cash or terror. The most infamous display of that terror came on February 14, 1929, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. 7 members of a rival gang, led by George Bugs Moran, were lined up against a wall in a Chicago garage and gunned down by men dressed as police officers. Though Capone was in Florida at the time, no one doubted who ordered it. The message was clear: betrayal or competition carried a death sentence. The massacre shocked the nation and marked the peak of Capone's reign, and the beginning of his downfall. Despite his wealth and power, Capone faced a relentless enemy, the federal government. President Herbert Hoover personally demanded that Capone be brought to justice. The FBI and Treasury Department began dissecting his operations, but he was too careful to be directly linked to murders or smuggling. What they eventually discovered was that Capone, like many arrogant men of power, had overlooked something seemingly trivial: taxes. In 1931, after years of investigation, Capone was charged with tax evasion. It seemed almost laughable at first. Here was a man who had ordered killings and controlled a criminal empire, yet what finally trapped him was unpaid income tax. But the evidence was solid. His lavish lifestyle, luxury cars, expensive suits, and grand mansions, contradicted his claims of no income. Witnesses testified to his accounting practices, revealing coded ledgers and hidden transactions. During the trial, Capone's confidence began to falter. The jury, intimidated by his reputation, was switched at the last minute to prevent bribery. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the once untouchable gangster stood before the law. On October 17, 1931, Al Capone was convicted and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison and fined $50,000, a monumental fall for a man who once owned half of Chicago's underworld. His imprisonment marked the end of an era. Capone was first sent to Atlanta, where he continued to bribe guards and live comfortably. But when reports of his privileges surfaced, the government transferred him to Alcatraz, the new maximum security prison designed to hold the most dangerous criminals in isolation. There, stripped of his empire and influence, Capone began to deteriorate. The years of excess had caught up to him. He suffered from neurosyphilis, a disease that slowly ate away at his mind. Once a cunning strategist, he became confused and childlike. Guards said he would spend hours talking to himself or playing banjo in the prison band. In 1939, after serving about 7 years, Capone was released on good behavior and medical grounds. He retired to his estate in Palm Island, Florida, where he lived quietly with his wife May and son Albert. Gone were the power and bravado. By the time he died in 1947, at the age of 48, his mind was said to have regressed to that of a child. The empire he built had long been dismantled, absorbed by other gangs or destroyed by the law. Yet his legend lived on. Al Capone became more than a criminal. He became a symbol of an era. His life embodied the contradictions of the American dream: ambition, greed, and the illusion of invincibility. The 1920s, for all their glamour, had produced a man who rose from poverty to immense wealth not by following rules but by exploiting them. His estimated fortune during his peak was immense. Adjusted for inflation, historians estimate that Capone's income from bootlegging, gambling, and racketeering ranged between $1.3 billion and $2 billion in today's money. Much of it was never recovered. He laundered money through legitimate businesses, laundromats, construction firms, and restaurants, giving rise to the phrase, money laundering. Capone's influence extended far beyond Chicago. His empire connected with New York crime syndicates, Canadian smugglers, and Caribbean rum runners. He taught future mob bosses the value of organization, how to structure crime like a corporation with departments, divisions, and accountants. Even after his fall, the system he built endured, becoming the model for organized crime in America for decades. But for all his riches, Capone's story is ultimately one of loss. His money could not save him from disease, prison, or history's judgment. The empire that seemed untouchable crumbled as quickly as it rose, undone by the very arrogance that built it. Yet his name, more than any other, remains synonymous with gangsterism. Films, books, and documentaries have immortalized him, turning the real Capone into myth, a figure who, in his time, embodied both the dark glamour and tragic cost of unchecked greed. From the smoky backrooms of Chicago to the cold cells of Alcatraz, Al Capone's story reminds us that even the richest criminals cannot buy eternity. His wealth dazzled, his power terrified, but in the end, the man who once ruled a city with gold and guns died a prisoner in his own mind. In the shadowy world of organized crime, there were men who ruled with fists, bullets, and fear, and then there was Meyer Lansky, the man who ruled with numbers. He wasn't a gangster in the classic sense. He didn't crave the spotlight, didn't leave a trail of corpses behind him, and never carried himself with the arrogance of men like Al Capone. Lansky's weapon was his mind, and his empire was built not from violence, but from calculation. By the time he died in 1983, he was rumored to have controlled hundreds of millions of dollars across continents. To many, he was known as the mob's accountant. To others, he was the silent architect behind the American mafia's fortune. Born Meyer Sucholjansky in 1902, in Grodno, then part of the Russian Empire, Lansky's story began like many immigrant tales of the early 20th century, with poverty, persecution, and the hope of a better life in America. His family fled anti-Semitic violence, settling in New York City's Lower East Side. It was a neighborhood overflowing with hustlers, pushcart vendors, and dreamers. For young Meyer, survival depended on what more than muscle. He met Benjamin Bugsy Siegel as a boy. The two became inseparable, an unlikely duo of brains and fire. Siegel was reckless, charming, and quick to violence. Lansky was quiet, methodical, and calculating. Together they formed the nucleus of what would later become one of the most powerful criminal syndicates in America. Their early years involved small-time rackets, running dice games, extortion, and protection schemes. But Lansky always saw beyond the streets. The Prohibition era arrived like a gold rush for the underworld. When alcohol became illegal in 1920, a new criminal economy was born. Lansky, Siegel, and their associates, including future kingpins Charles, Lucky, Luciano, and Frank Costello, saw opportunity not just in smuggling liquor, but in organization. Most gangs of the time were ethnic enclaves, Irish, Italian, Jewish, constantly at war with each other. Lansky envisioned something larger, a national network of organized crime. In 1931, after years of bloodshed known as the Castellamarese War, Luciano consolidated the Italian mafia into a national syndicate. At his side, advising and financing, was Meyer Lansky. He helped create a business structure for crime, dividing territories, establishing a board of directors known as the Commission, and crucially, building systems to launder and protect the profits. Where others saw crime as chaos, Lansky saw it as enterprise. He was the first to understand that criminal empires needed legitimacy to survive. Through a complex web of investments, he turned illicit gains into respectable businesses, nightclubs, hotels, casinos, and real estate. He pioneered techniques still studied by financial investigators today: offshore accounts, shell companies, and tax shelters. The term, money laundering, was, in many ways, a reflection of his genius. Lansky's influence stretched across the country. In New York, he managed gambling operations in partnership with Luciano and Costello. In Florida, he built casinos and race tracks that funneled millions in cash into legitimate circulation. In Havana, Cuba, Lansky found his crown jewel. During the 1940s and 1950s, he transformed the city into the Las Vegas of the Caribbean, a glittering paradise for the rich and corrupt. Through his friendship with Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista, Lansky secured exclusive gambling licenses and government protection. He invested in the Hotel Nacional and later helped build the Riviera Hotel, a $14 million masterpiece that became a symbol of luxury and corruption. The casinos were not just entertainment, they were money machines. Cash flowed freely, untaxed and untraceable, while politicians, entertainers, and mobsters mingled beneath crystal chandeliers. At the height of his power, Lansky's network spanned from Miami to Havana, from Las Vegas to London. He maintained a low profile, avoiding the flamboyance that destroyed men like Siegel. When Siegel built the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas, a venture that nearly bankrupted them both, Lansky watched as his old friend spiraled out of control. Siegel's murder in 1947 shocked the underworld, but Lansky didn't flinch. He stepped in to stabilize the Las Vegas operations, ensuring that the mafia's investments continued to grow. Lansky's fortune was immense, though much of it was hidden. The U.S. government later estimated he controlled over $300 million through various accounts and holdings. Adjusted for inflation, that would be more than $2.5 billion today. Yet for all his influence, he maintained an aura of invisibility. Law enforcement agencies knew his name but could rarely prove his crimes. Unlike Capone, Lansky paid his taxes, filed his paperwork, and kept no traceable accounts under his own name. He operated through trusts and proxies, ensuring plausible deniability. He was also pragmatic. During World War II, Lansky reportedly assisted the U.S. Navy through a covert agreement known as Operation Underworld, helping secure New York's docks from Axis saboteurs by leveraging his control of the longshoremen's unions. It was a strange moment where crime and patriotism intersected, a mobster protecting America's ports in exchange for leniency. But power, even the quiet kind, never lasts forever. By the 1960s, law enforcement began catching up. The Kefauver hearings and later Senate investigations into organized crime exposed parts of the syndicate's operations. Lansky, though rarely indicted, found himself under constant surveillance. The fall of Batista in 1959 dealt him a devastating blow. Fidel Castro seized all his Cuban assets, including the Riviera. Overnight, Lansky lost tens of millions. Still, he remained resilient. In his later years, Lansky attempted to retire peacefully in Miami Beach, but the U.S. government pursued him relentlessly for alleged tax evasion and racketeering. Facing possible imprisonment, he fled to Israel in 1970, invoking the law of return, which granted automatic citizenship to Jews. For a time, it seemed the mob's accountant had found sanctuary. But even in Israel, the pressure followed him. The U.S. government demanded his extradition, accusing him of laundering millions through Swiss banks. After years of legal battles, Israel denied his citizenship and forced him to return to America in 1972. When he landed back in Miami, he was met not by assassins or rivals, but by federal agents. Yet despite decades of investigation, Meyer Lansky was never convicted of any major crime. The government could not find the fortune it claimed he controlled. They believed it was hidden offshore, in Switzerland, Panama, or the Cayman Islands, but no conclusive proof ever surfaced. "We couldn't find the money," one investigator later admitted. "Either he was smarter than we thought, or the money was gone." Lansky's final years were quiet. He spent his time walking along the beaches of Miami with his wife Thelma, maintaining the appearance of a frail old man living modestly. When he died in 1983 at the age of 80, his estate was valued at less than $60,000. It was a shocking revelation. Could one of the most powerful financial minds in organized crime really have died nearly penniless? Or had he simply hidden his wealth so perfectly that it would never be found? To this day, the truth remains elusive. Some believe Lansky's fortune lies buried in secret accounts, still accruing interest under false names. Others think he lost much of it through political upheavals and the slow erosion of his empire. What's certain is that Meyer Lansky changed organized crime forever. He professionalized it. He made it global. He turned gangsters into businessmen and crime into industry. His calm intelligence and financial foresight laid the foundation for the modern underworld's global reach. He understood that power didn't always need to roar, it could whisper, move in silence, and still control everything. In the end, Meyer Lansky's true legacy is measured not in dollars, but in influence. While others ruled with fear, he ruled with intellect. While others were remembered for their brutality, he was remembered for his brilliance. The man who started with nothing on the streets of New York built an empire so complex, even the government couldn't map it, and when he died, he left behind not just mystery, but a model, a template for how the world's richest criminals would operate in the decades to come. In the blood-soaked streets of Miami during the 1970s and 1980s, one name struck fear into dealers, rivals, and even the most hardened cartel operatives: Griselda Blanco, the woman who ruled with more ruthlessness than most of her male counterparts. Known as La Madrina, the Godmother, or the Black Widow, she was the first true queenpin of the cocaine trade. Her rise was a storm of ambition, violence, and sheer audacity that carved a bloody path through the underworld. Born in Cartagena, Colombia, in 1943, Griselda's childhood was steeped in poverty and crime. Her mother moved them to Medellin when she was still a child, a city that would later become synonymous with cocaine empires. By the time Griselda was a teenager, she had already embraced a life of crime. Stories from Medellin's slums tell of a girl who kidnapped another child for ransom and, when the plan failed, pulled the trigger herself. Whether that story is myth or truth hardly matters. It became the first chapter in the legend of a woman who would one day make entire cities tremble. In the late 1960s, Griselda began smuggling stolen goods and counterfeit documents. But she saw bigger opportunities forming. The U.S. appetite for cocaine was exploding, and Colombia had the perfect supply. Where others hesitated, Griselda saw a fortune waiting to be claimed. She built a network that funneled cocaine from Medellin into the United States, long before Pablo Escobar rose to fame. By the early 1970s, she had moved her operations to Queens, New York, alongside her then-husband Alberto Bravo. Together, they pioneered smuggling methods that became the foundation for the modern drug trade. Cocaine was packed inside furniture, clothing, and even women's lingerie. Griselda was said to have personally designed bras and girdles with hidden compartments to move products through customs undetected. Her network expanded rapidly, and soon she was supplying cocaine to some of New York's biggest dealers. At its peak, her operation was moving hundreds of kilos every month, generating millions in profit. But success brought enemies. Federal agents began closing in, and by 1975, the DA indicted Griselda and more than 30 of her associates. Rather than face charges, she fled back to Colombia, leaving chaos in her wake. In Colombia, she regrouped and refined her empire. By the late 1970s, she had relocated once again, this time to Miami, which was quickly becoming the new capital of the cocaine trade. It was here that she would rise to power unlike any woman before or since. Miami in the late 1970s was wild, decadent, and deadly. Cocaine flowed like water, and violence was as common as sunshine. Griselda Blanco didn't just participate in the chaos, she defined it. Her organization, often called the Medellin to Miami Pipeline, controlled much of the cocaine entering the United States. She employed hundreds of couriers, enforcers, and assassins, all loyal to La Madrina. Her nickname, the Black Widow, came from her deadly personal life. Over the years, 3 of her husbands were killed under suspicious circumstances. Some claimed she ordered the hits herself when they crossed her or became liabilities. Her temper was legendary. Even minor mistakes could result in execution. Associates whispered her name with both respect and terror. At the height of her reign, Griselda's fortune was estimated at $2 billion, an astronomical figure for the time. She owned sprawling estates in Miami, lavish mansions in Medellin, and fleets of cars and private jets. She moved through the city in designer clothes and diamonds, surrounded by bodyguards and killers. But Griselda wasn't content with wealth alone. She craved control. To enforce her rule, she unleashed a wave of violence that transformed Miami into a war zone. Between 1979 and 1984, the city recorded thousands of drug-related murders, many linked directly to her. Drive-by shootings, daylight assassinations, and grenade attacks became so frequent that local journalists coined a new phrase: the cocaine cowboys era. Her favorite assassins were a pair of hitmen known only as Los Pistoleros, who roamed the streets on motorcycles, pulling up beside targets and firing point-blank before speeding away. It was a brutal innovation in gangland warfare, one that would later spread to drug wars across Latin America. Despite her savagery, Griselda possessed a strange charisma. She was said to be both affectionate and cruel, a devoted mother and a remorseless killer. She named one of her sons Michael Corleone Blanco, after the infamous character from The Godfather. To her, life was a movie, and she was the star. But the spotlight eventually burned too bright. By the early 1980s, law enforcement agencies had declared war on the cocaine trade. DEA task forces began dismantling the cartels piece by piece. Griselda's violent tactics, once effective, now made her a high-priority target. She became increasingly paranoid, killing anyone she suspected of betrayal, including close associates. In 1985, her empire began to crumble. The DA tracked her movements through intercepted calls and informants. After nearly a decade on the run, she was arrested in Irvine, California, while living under an alias. Her capture marked the end of an era. When she was brought to trial, prosecutors portrayed her as the most ruthless drug trafficker in history. Witnesses described scenes of unimaginable violence, murders ordered for debts as small as a few $100s, or simply to make an example. Yet even in custody, Griselda remained unrepentant. She smirked through court proceedings, confident she would never serve her full sentence. She was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. While behind bars, she lived comfortably, bribing guards and maintaining contact with the remnants of her organization. She even reportedly continued to run parts of her business from within prison walls, a testament to her influence. In 2004, after nearly 2 decades in custody, Griselda Blanco was released and deported back to Colombia. She was older now, frail, and largely forgotten by the new generation of traffickers who had inherited the empire she helped build. She claimed to have retired, living quietly in Medellin. But history has a way of closing its circles. On September 3, 2012, Griselda Blanco was gunned down outside a butcher shop in Medellin by an assassin on a motorcycle, killed in the very fashion she had popularized decades earlier. One bullet to the head, another to the shoulder. The Black Widow was gone. Her death marked the end of one of the most violent and lucrative chapters in drug trafficking history. But her legacy endures, both in the world she shaped and the myths she inspired. Movies, documentaries, and television series continue to explore her story, fascinated by the paradox of a woman who ruled a man's world through fear alone. For all her savagery, Griselda Blanco changed the global drug trade. She proved that power wasn't limited by gender, and that ruthlessness could build an empire as easily as it could destroy one. She laid the groundwork for the international cocaine market long before Escobar turned it into a global phenomenon. In many ways, she was the blueprint. Even in death, her name remains synonymous with the dark glamour of the drug world, a woman who lived and died by her own code, unafraid, unrepentant, and unforgettable. And in the underworld's unwritten history, Griselda Blanco will forever stand as a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous empire builders are not the loudest, but the coldest. In the violent underworld of Mexico's drug trade, few figures embodied both power and mystery like Amado Carrillo Fuentes, the man the world would come to know as El Señor de los Cielos, the Lord of the Skies. He was not the loud, blood-soaked type of kingpin who flaunted his wealth or courted fame. Instead, Carrillo operated in quiet sophistication, building one of the most profitable and efficient cocaine transport empires in history. By the time of his death in 1997, his fortune was estimated at more than $25 billion, making him one of the wealthiest criminals to have ever lived. His story begins in Sinaloa, Mexico, a region that has produced more drug lords than any other part of the country. Born in 1956 into a large, modest family, Amato's childhood was marked by hardship and survival. His uncle, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, known as Don Neto, was already an influential trafficker, part of the infamous Guadalajara cartel that controlled much of Mexico's narcotics trade in the 1970s and early 1980s. Amato learned quickly, absorbing the logistics, connections, and discipline needed to thrive in a business where a single mistake could mean death. When the Guadalajara cartel collapsed in the late 1980s following the arrest of its leaders, Don Neto, Rafael Caro Quintero, and Miguel Ángel Felix Gallardo, the Mexican drug world splintered into factions. Out of that chaos emerged a new generation of traffickers, younger, smarter, and far more ambitious. Among them was Amato Carrillo Fuentes. While other upstarts fought openly for dominance, Amato took a different approach. He focused on the skies. His plan was revolutionary: to build a fleet of private jets and cargo planes capable of transporting cocaine directly from Colombia to Mexico and then into the United States. It was a strategy that would redefine smuggling operations and make him both untouchable and unimaginably rich. By the early 1990s, Amato had transformed his organization, the Juarez Cartel, into one of the most powerful criminal enterprises in the world. His fleet reportedly included over 30 Boeing 727s, Gulfstreams, and Learjets. Each could carry tons of cocaine across borders in a single flight. Instead of relying on small, risky shipments, Carrillo's method allowed for massive, industrial-scale transport. He earned his nickname, the Lord of the Skies, not from vanity, but from sheer innovation. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Carrillo ran his operation with military precision. He avoided flamboyance, preferring tailored suits over gold chains, and boardroom negotiations over gunfights. He understood that discretion was a shield. While others filled tablets and DA files with their antics, Carrillo moved in the background, striking multimillion-dollar deals with Colombian suppliers like the Cali and Medellin cartels. He was, in many ways, a businessman first. His empire was diversified, spanning from narcotics trafficking and money laundering to real estate, aviation, and front companies scattered across Mexico, Panama, and the United States. He established legitimate-looking businesses, some even listed on government records, which masked the movement of billions of dollars. Amato's rise, however, was not without blood. When he took over the Juarez cartel in the early 1990s, it was through betrayal and murder. His mentor, Rafael Aguilar Guajardo, had led the cartel before him. In 1993, Amato arranged for Aguilar's assassination in Cancun, seizing control of his operations. It was a decisive, calculated move, the kind that made him both respected and feared. From that moment, Carrillo's influence exploded. He controlled key border routes into El Paso, Texas, particularly the corridor through Ciudad Juarez, one of the most valuable smuggling channels in the world. Billions of dollars in cocaine passed through his hands, making him one of the largest drug traffickers in history. But with wealth came exposure. By the mid-1990s, U.S. and Mexican authorities had begun to realize the scale of his empire. The DA, the FBI, and Mexico's federal judicial police launched massive joint investigations aimed at dismantling his network. Despite their efforts, Carrillo remained one step ahead. His intelligence network was vast, often receiving tips about raids before they even began. He paid off law enforcement, military generals, and politicians on both sides of the border. One U.S. agent later remarked, "Amato wasn't just powerful, he was protected. His money reached everywhere." Carrillo's low profile and intelligence made him almost invisible. He rarely appeared in public, and photographs of him were scarce. He avoided cell phones, meetings, and exposure. He preferred coded messages and layers of intermediaries. To the world, he was more myth than man, a ghost who ruled an empire in silence. By 1996, Amato's wealth was estimated to rival that of Pablo Escobar's at his peak. His cartel was earning over $200 million a month, and his personal net worth reportedly exceeded $25 billion. He was building palatial homes across Mexico, including one in Mexico City that became legendary for its opulence: marble floors, bulletproof walls, private tunnels, and hidden rooms. Yet beneath the luxury, paranoia festered. He knew that power in the drug trade was fleeting, and that the law and his enemies were closing in. In early 1997, Carrillo made a desperate and fateful decision. Believing his life to be in danger, and terrified of being recognized or assassinated, he decided to change his appearance through plastic surgery. On July 4, 1997, he checked into a Mexico City hospital under a false name, accompanied by his bodyguards and 2 surgeons. What happened next remains one of the most bizarre and mysterious episodes in criminal history. During the operation, a complex procedure meant to alter his face and erase his identity, something went terribly wrong. Amado Carrillo Fuentes died on the operating table, reportedly from complications related to anesthesia. His death sent shockwaves through Mexico and the international drug trade. Within days, the 2 surgeons who had performed the operation were found dead, encased in cement and sealed in steel drums, dumped outside Mexico City. Officially, the Lord of the Skies was gone. But rumors spread almost immediately. Some claimed he had faked his death, using the surgery as a cover to disappear with his fortune. Others believed the body wasn't his at all, that the government staged the death to save face. No theory was ever confirmed, and to this day, speculation persists about whether Amado Carrillo Fuentes truly died that day. At his funeral in his hometown of Guamacalito, thousands attended. His coffin, draped in white flowers, was watched over by soldiers and mourners alike. Local residents described it as more of a royal procession than a burial. For many, Amado was not just a criminal, he was a figure of myth, a man who had outsmarted governments and built an empire from the clouds. In the aftermath of his death, the Juarez cartel descended into chaos. Internal conflicts erupted as lieutenants fought for control. Violence surged across Mexico, marking the beginning of a new and bloodier chapter in the nation's narco wars. Amado's brother, Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, eventually took over but never reached the same level of wealth or influence. Today, Amado Carrillo Fuentes remains a symbol of both ingenuity and the deadly costs of power. He changed the logistics of drug trafficking forever, introducing a level of sophistication and efficiency that transformed the trade into a global, corporate-scale enterprise. His empire didn't rely on terror or notoriety. It thrived on precision and silence. And whether he truly died on that operating table or vanished into the mist with billions in hidden accounts, one truth endures. No one flew higher in the world of organized crime than the Lord of the Skies, and no one fell quite as mysteriously. When people think of the Colombian cocaine boom of the 1970s and 1980s, they often picture Pablo Escobar, the ruthless king of cocaine. Yet behind Escobar's rise, and the birth of the modern cocaine empire, stood another man, Carlos Leder, the visionary and eccentric trafficker who transformed the drug trade into a global business. He wasn't just another smuggler. Leder was a revolutionary, a capitalist zealot, and a man whose dream of power was as boundless as his ambition. By the time U.S. authorities finally captured him in 1987, Leder had amassed an estimated fortune of $2.7 billion, placing him among the richest criminals in history. His story is a volatile blend of brilliance and madness, greed and ideology, a story that helped shape the entire structure of modern organized crime. Carlos Enrique Leder Rivos was born in Armenia, Colombia, in 1949 to a German father and Colombian mother. His father owned a small auto business, and from an early age, Leder developed a fascination with cars, airplanes, and adventure. However, his teenage years took a darker turn. By the late 1960s, Leder was dabbling in small-scale criminal activity, stealing cars, smuggling marijuana, and running scams in both Colombia and the United States. After moving to Massachusetts as a young man, Leder became deeply involved in the counterculture movement of the 1960s. He admired the free-spirited lifestyle but quickly saw opportunity in the excesses of the era. Drugs were everywhere, but supply chains were inefficient. Cocaine, at the time, was still a luxury substance reserved for the rich and elite. Leder envisioned something different, a streamlined, large-scale business model that would make cocaine accessible to the masses. His ambitions grew while serving time in a U.S. prison for car theft in the 1970s. There, he met George Jung, an American smuggler with ties to marijuana trafficking networks in California. Together, in prison, the two men began to plan a new kind of operation, one that would move cocaine from Colombia to the United States using small planes. When they were released, they put the plan into action. Leder and Jung's partnership marked the beginning of a seismic shift in the drug trade. Using private aircraft, they transported cocaine from Colombia to the Bahamas, then on to Florida. The duo found a perfect base of operations on Norman's Cay, a small island in the Bahamas. Leder purchased most of the island, built airstrips, bribed local officials, and installed radar equipment. Soon, Norman's Cay became the nerve center of the cocaine pipeline. It was a tropical fortress, a kingdom of wealth, violence, and excess. Private jets came and went daily, carrying tons of cocaine bound for Miami. Millions of dollars flowed back to Colombia. Parties raged on the beach, complete with prostitutes, imported champagne, and armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Leder ruled it all like a pirate king. Leder's influence extended beyond smuggling. He was one of the founding members of the Medellin cartel, alongside Pablo Escobar, Jorge Ochoa, and Jose Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha. His vision and connections helped transform the cartel from a group of traffickers into a powerful multinational syndicate. But unlike Escobar, who craved political power and the adoration of the poor, Leder was driven by ideology. He idolized Adolf Hitler and often referred to himself as a National Socialist. His German ancestry became a strange obsession. He even distributed neo-Nazi propaganda in Colombia and openly spoke about establishing a cocaine-fueled revolution against what he saw as imperialist American influence. In his mind, cocaine was not just a product, it was a weapon, a tool to undermine the West while enriching Colombia. Despite his erratic personality, Leder's innovations reshaped global trafficking logistics. He was among the first to recognize that air transport was the key to efficiency and profit. He also developed a sophisticated system for laundering money, investing in legitimate businesses and offshore accounts long before such tactics became common practice. His genius lay in combining organized crime with corporate precision. By the early 1980s, Leder's empire was generating hundreds of millions of dollars per month. The Medellin cartel's cocaine flooded the United States, sparking an epidemic that would devastate American cities. The cartel's influence stretched from South America to the Caribbean, Mexico, and beyond. Leder's Norman's Cay operation was the artery pumping life into this massive network. But as his wealth and power grew, so did his paranoia and instability. He began to alienate his partners with his unpredictable behavior. Escobar, who valued control and secrecy, grew wary of Leder's constant media attention and wild political rants. Leder gave interviews, boasted about his wealth, and publicly condemned the U.S. government. His flamboyance was bad for business, and dangerous for everyone involved. Tensions within the Medellin cartel deepened. Leder's enemies multiplied. The Bahamian government, once complicit in his operations, began to feel U.S. pressure. The DA, FBI, and CIA intensified their focus on the Caribbean smuggling routes. Leder's beloved Norman's Cay became a target. In 1983, U.S. law enforcement launched Operation Caribe, a coordinated effort to dismantle the island's drug infrastructure. Under immense international pressure, Bahamian forces raided the island, seizing planes and property. Leder fled, narrowly escaping capture. Norman's Cay was finished. He retreated to Colombia, where he sought refuge under the protection of the Medellin cartel. But his fall from grace was rapid. Escobar, seeing Leder as a liability, began to distance himself. Meanwhile, Colombian and American forces intensified their hunt. For years, Leder hid in the jungles of Antioquia, constantly on the move. In 1987, his luck finally ran out. Colombian police, acting on intelligence from the U.S., captured Leder in a dramatic raid. He was extradited to the United States, the first major cartel figure to face U.S. justice. The trial was explosive. Leder was charged with drug trafficking, conspiracy, and money laundering. Facing a life sentence, he agreed to testify against Manuel Noriega, the Panamanian dictator accused of drug trafficking and corruption. In exchange for his cooperation, Letter's sentence was reduced. Initially given life plus 135 years, it was later cut to 55 years. He spent decades in U.S. federal prisons, much of it under heavy protection due to the risk of retaliation. Even in prison, Letter's legend persisted. Some viewed him as a mad genius, a man whose vision reshaped global drug logistics. Others saw him as a cautionary tale of hubris, ideology, and self-destruction. Unlike Escobar, who died in a hail of bullets, Letter lived to see the empire he helped create collapse. In 2020, after serving over 3 decades in U.S. custody, Carlos Letter was released and deported to Germany, the country of his father's birth. He was in his 70s, frail, and largely forgotten by the world. The once flamboyant smuggler who dreamed of a cocaine-fueled utopia was now an old man living quietly under government supervision. Yet his legacy is undeniable. Letter was the architect of modern cocaine trafficking, the man who proved that air routes, corporate-style management, and massive-scale logistics could turn an illegal trade into a global industry. His innovations inspired generations of traffickers who followed, from the Colombian cartels of the 1980s to the Mexican syndicates that dominate today. In the grand tapestry of criminal history, Carlos Letter stands out as both a visionary and a villain, a man who mixed ideology, greed, and genius to create a fortune measured in billions. He may not have built the largest empire, but without him, the cocaine explosion that changed the world might never have taken flight. By the time he vanished from public view, his empire was gone, his billions confiscated or lost. Yet the methods he pioneered still live on, proof that one man's ambition can forever alter the machinery of crime. In the mist-covered mountains of the Golden Triangle, where the borders of Myanmar, then Burma, Thailand, and Laos converge, a legend once ruled, a man who was both warlord and businessman, drug king and nationalist hero, depending on who told the story. His name was Khansa, born Chang Chi-fu, and for decades, he commanded the world's largest heroin empire. At the height of his power in the 1980s, Khansa controlled over half of the global heroin supply, raking in billions of dollars from opium grown in the remote highlands of Southeast Asia. His name became synonymous with the Golden Triangle itself, a region long shrouded in secrecy, violence, and intoxicating profit. For many, Khansa was the embodiment of a paradox, a man who claimed to fight for his people's freedom while financing his revolution through addiction and death. Born in 1934 in the Shan state of Burma, Khansa's early life was shaped by war and chaos. His father was Chinese, his mother Shan, a member of the ethnic group that would later define his identity and political ambitions. As a teenager, Khansa witnessed the crumbling of British colonial rule and the violent birth of modern Myanmar. The post-independence years saw ethnic tensions erupt across the country, and the Shan people, like many others, began fighting for autonomy. In this volatile environment, Khansa found his calling, not as a politician, but as a soldier and trader. He began his career as a mercenary, first aligning himself with the Burmese army before deserting to form his own militia. His earliest ventures involved the opium trade, a staple of the region's economy for centuries. Unlike others who trafficked in secrecy, Khansa approached the business strategically. He organized growers, standardized production, and secured transport routes. He turned what had been fragmented tribal trading into an industrial operation. By the late 1960s, he had formed the Shan United Army, SUA, a force that numbered in the thousands. Ostensibly, its mission was to fight for Shan independence. In practice, it served as the backbone of Khansa's narcotics empire. His fighters guarded poppy fields, escorted convoys, and collected taxes from rival traffickers. The money funded weapons, vehicles, and infrastructure. Villages that cooperated were protected, those that resisted were punished. Khansa's operation was vast and remarkably sophisticated for its time. His base of power lay deep in the Burmese highlands, far beyond the reach of government troops. There, caravans of mules and trucks transported raw opium through jungle trails and mountain passes to secret laboratories. Chemists converted it into morphine and heroin, which were then smuggled across the Thai border. From there, international syndicates, many linked to Hong Kong triads and American crime families, handled global distribution. His network stretched from the jungles of Southeast Asia to the streets of New York, London, and Sydney. U.S. officials estimated that by 1987, Kunsaw's organization supplied 60 to 70% of the heroin entering the United States. His revenues were staggering, with some intelligence reports placing his fortune at over $5 billion, an amount that would rival even the biggest Latin American cartels of later decades. Despite this, Kunsaw cultivated a public image that bordered on myth. To the Shan people, he presented himself as a freedom fighter, a Robin Hood figure defying the oppressive Burmese government. He built schools, clinics, and roads in Shan villages, funded ironically by drug money. To Western journalists who managed to reach his jungle headquarters, he offered tea, posed for photos, and gave interviews where he justified his trade as a necessary evil. "If the world wants no drugs," he famously said, "they should pay us not to grow them." It was a line that captured both his cynicism and his shrewd understanding of global hypocrisy. The West's demand for narcotics had created an enormous market, and Kunsaw merely supplied it. He often blamed the United States for fueling the drug trade through its own appetite. When reporters questioned him about the morality of his empire, he shrugged. "I'm just a businessman," he would say. Kunsaw's wealth and influence were unmatched in the region. His forces were better armed than many national armies, equipped with automatic rifles, artillery, and even surface-to-air missiles. His compounds were mini-states, complete with hospitals, schools, and even an airstrip for private planes. Visitors described his headquarters at Homong, near the Thai border, as a cross between a military base and a royal palace. But such power could not go unchecked forever. Both the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, DA, and the Burmese government considered him a prime target. The DA offered a $2 million bounty for his capture, calling him the world's most powerful drug lord. Washington pressured Thailand to act against him, while the Burmese military launched sporadic offensives against his forces. For years, Kunsaw's fortress-like position and control over local loyalties made him untouchable. But by the early 1990s, his empire began to weaken. Internal divisions within the Shan movement, increased military pressure, and the rise of competing ethnic armies eroded his control. The international spotlight also became too bright. The U.S. intensified sanctions and pressured neighboring countries to cut off support. In 1996, facing military defeat and dwindling influence, Kunsaw made a surprising move. Rather than die in battle or flee into exile, he surrendered to the Burmese government. The deal he struck remains one of the most controversial in modern drug enforcement history. In exchange for his cooperation, Kunsaw was granted immunity from extradition to the United States and allowed to live freely in Yangon, Rangoon. The government, eager to neutralize a major rebel leader and reassert control over the Shan state, accepted the deal. It was a stunning reversal. The man once branded as the Opium King was now a semi-retired businessman, investing in construction and transportation ventures in Myanmar's capital. U.S. Officials were outraged. The DA, which had pursued Kunsaw for 2 decades, called the deal a mockery of justice. But in Myanmar, the arrangement was seen as a pragmatic solution. With Kunsaw's surrender, his army dissolved, and the government gained a fragile peace in the region. Kunsaw lived out his remaining years quietly, far from the mountains where he built his empire. He died in 2007, reportedly from natural causes, at the age of 73. Yet even in death, his legend endured. For many in Myanmar, Kunsaw remains a complex figure, a hero to some, a villain to others. His empire may have crumbled, but the infrastructure and methods he pioneered continue to influence the global drug trade. The Golden Triangle, though diminished, still produces opium and methamphetamine on an industrial scale. Kunsaw's life reflects the murky intersection of politics, war, and crime. He understood that in a region defined by conflict and poverty, power was not just about ideology. It was about control over resources, land, and loyalty. In that sense, he was not so different from the generals and politicians who opposed him. His fortune may have been earned in blood and addiction, but it also exposed the uncomfortable truth about the world's drug economy, that demand and supply are bound together by corruption, poverty, and global indifference. Kunsal once said, "I did what I had to do to survive." In the shadowy jungles of the Golden Triangle, survival meant power, and power meant heroin. In the dark corridors of global organized crime, few names inspire as much fear or intrigue as Semyon Mogilevich. Unlike the flamboyant drug lords of Colombia or the violent mafia bosses of Italy, Mogilevich built his empire in the shadows, manipulating banks, governments, and corporations with the precision of a chess master. His name rarely appeared in the headlines, yet behind closed doors, he was whispered about by law enforcement agencies across continents. By the early 2000s, US and European authorities estimated his fortune at over $10 billion, making him one of the richest and most dangerous criminals alive. Known as the Brainy Don, or the Billion-Dollar Don, Mogilevich was not a man who relied on brute force. His weapon was intellect, cold, calculating, and ruthless. Semyon Yudkovich Mogilevich was born in Kiev, Ukraine, in 1946, into a working-class Jewish family. He graduated from Lviv University with a degree in economics, a rare achievement among the future generation of Soviet gangsters. While many of his contemporaries rose to power through violence, Mogilevich's entry into the underworld came through fraud, deceit, and financial manipulation. During the chaotic collapse of the Soviet Union, when wealth and power were up for grabs, Mogilevich saw opportunity in the confusion. In the late 1970s and 1980s, he began running small-scale scams in Moscow, targeting fellow Jews who were emigrating to Israel or the United States. He offered to sell their property and valuables, promising to send the money later. Instead, he pocketed the cash. It was a cynical scheme, but it laid the foundation for what would become his lifelong specialty, using paper trails instead of gunfire to control vast networks of wealth. By the early 1990s, with the Soviet Empire disintegrating, Mogilevich's ambitions expanded. He moved his operations to Budapest, Hungary, where he began to build an international web of companies, shell corporations, and bank accounts. From there, he invested in everything from arms dealing and oil trading to art smuggling and money laundering. He surrounded himself with lawyers, accountants, and politicians, blurring the lines between legitimate business and criminal enterprise. What made Mogilevich different from typical mobsters was his ability to operate within legal frameworks, twisting the rules of capitalism itself. His organization, often called the Solntsevskaya Bratva Network, stretched across Europe, Russia, and North America. The FBI, Interpol, and Europol later described it as a global criminal conglomerate, involved in narcotics, weapons, human trafficking, and financial crimes. But its true strength lay in its complexity. Every deal, every transaction, was hidden behind layers of corporations and middlemen. Even when authorities uncovered one shell company, dozens more existed to take its place. By the mid-1990s, Mogilevich had found a new frontier: Western financial markets. Through a network of businessmen and front companies, he gained control of YBM Magnex International, a Pennsylvania-based firm listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. On paper, YBM manufactured magnets. In reality, it was a massive money laundering front for Mogilevich's organization. The company's public image was impeccable. It hired respected executives, accountants, and even auditors from top firms. Investors poured in millions, unaware that YBM's revenues came not from manufacturing but from organized crime operations in Eastern Europe. In 1998, Canadian and U.S. authorities raided YBM's offices, uncovering a labyrinth of fake transactions and offshore accounts. The scandal wiped out nearly $700 million in investor money and exposed one of the most sophisticated criminal financial schemes in modern history. Yet, remarkably, Mogilevich himself was nowhere to be found. From his base in Moscow, he continued to operate with near impunity. Russia, unlike the United States or much of Europe, had no extradition treaty that would allow his arrest. Moreover, Mogilevic's connections within Russian politics provided him with a shield of protection. Western intelligence agencies alleged that he maintained relationships with high-ranking officials in both business and government, individuals who benefited from his financial expertise and access to illicit capital. The FBI described him as the most powerful and dangerous gangster in the world. Yet his operations were almost impossible to dismantle. Unlike Escobar or Guzman, who relied on visible control of territory, Mogilevic's empire existed in ledgers, contracts, and offshore accounts. He didn't need soldiers. He had lawyers, bankers, and politicians. His reach extended into Europe's energy sector, where he facilitated deals between Russian and Ukrainian oil and gas companies. Intelligence reports linked him to Rosukrenergo, a shadowy intermediary that managed billions in natural gas transactions between Russia's Gazprom and Ukraine. These deals were often opaque, riddled with allegations of corruption and bribery, but always profitable for Mogilevic and his associates. In the early 2000s, international pressure began to mount. The FBI, Interpol, and Europol coordinated investigations into his network. In 2003, the U.S. Department of Justice indicted him on 45 counts of fraud, racketeering, and money laundering. His name was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list in 2009, alongside terrorists and serial killers. But catching Semyon Mogilevic was another matter entirely. His residence in Moscow made extradition impossible, and the Russian government showed little interest in cooperating. At times, reports surfaced suggesting that he had been detained briefly by Russian authorities, only to be quietly released. Officially, he remained a retired businessman. For investigators, the most frustrating aspect of Mogilevic's career was his invisibility. He did not flaunt his wealth or seek publicity. There were no flashy cars, no sprawling mansions featured in tabloids. Instead, he preferred anonymity, living comfortably but discreetly in Moscow, surrounded by bodyguards and loyal associates. The magnitude of his operations was staggering. Analysts estimate that at its peak, his network laundered billions of dollars annually, moving money through Cyprus, Liechtenstein, Panama, and Caribbean tax havens. Much of it passed through legitimate financial institutions, often unnoticed or ignored by regulators. He understood global finance better than many bankers, and he used that knowledge to exploit every loophole available. While drug lords like Escobar died violently, Mogilevic thrived because he avoided confrontation. His violence was economic, bloodless but devastating. Through fraud and manipulation, he destabilized markets, bankrupted investors, and undermined the rule of law. He didn't shoot his enemies, he outsmarted them. Even today, Mogilevic's full wealth remains a mystery. Some reports claim that much of it has been hidden under aliases and front companies still operating across Europe. Others suggest he diversified into real estate, art, and cryptocurrency before such investments were even fashionable. In the late 2010s, his public appearances dwindled. Though believed to still reside in Russia, his health reportedly declined with age. Yet his legacy endures in the shape of modern financial crime. The techniques he pioneered, offshore shell companies, trade-based laundering, and high-level political protection, have become the blueprint for 21st century corruption. Semyon Mogilevic represents a different kind of criminal empire, one where violence is replaced by influence, and where money itself becomes the ultimate weapon. His story blurs the boundaries between organized crime and global finance, raising uncomfortable questions about how much of the world's wealth might be tainted by the hands of men like him. To the average person, he is almost invisible, a ghost hiding in the data of international banking. To those who track him, he is the architect of a new form of criminal power, subtle, sophisticated, and terrifyingly effective. And unlike so many before him, Semyon Mogilevic never fell in a hail of bullets or stood trial for his empire of billions. He simply vanished into the folds of legitimate business and political influence, a reminder that the richest criminals are not always the loudest or the most violent. They are often the ones who understand the system better than anyone else. When the name Bernie Madoff entered the public consciousness in December 2008, it did so with the impact of an earthquake. He wasn't a drug lord, mob boss, or arms dealer. He wore tailored suits, spoke softly, and operated from a Manhattan office that exuded wealth and stability. Yet, behind that calm exterior, Madoff was orchestrating the largest financial fraud in history, a crime so vast it destroyed fortunes, shattered lives, and reshaped global trust in finance. At the peak of his empire, Bernie Madoff was estimated to control $65 billion in fictitious wealth, a figure that made him one of the richest and most deceitful criminals ever known. His scheme was not fueled by drugs or weapons but by illusion and greed, both his own and that of the investors who trusted him implicitly. Born in Queens, New York, in 1938, Bernard Lawrence Madoff came from a modest background. His father, a plumber turned stockbroker, had a turbulent financial career. Young Bernie was ambitious, determined to transcend his family's working-class roots. After earning a degree in political science from Hofstra University, Madoff founded Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities LLC in 1960 with just $5,000 he earned from lifeguarding and installing sprinklers. At first, his firm traded penny stocks, a low-level corner of the financial world. But Madoff had an instinct for opportunity and a knack for charm. By the 1970s, he had positioned himself as one of the pioneers of electronic trading, helping shape the technology that would revolutionize Wall Street. His early embrace of computerized systems earned him credibility among financial institutions. Madoff's company quickly grew into a respected market maker, executing trades for major investment firms and earning consistent commissions. Clients and colleagues saw him as an innovator, a man who could navigate the chaos of markets with calm precision. He cultivated an image of integrity and exclusivity. His name became synonymous with trust, a powerful irony in hindsight. Yet somewhere along the line, ambition turned into deception. The exact moment Madoff's legitimate business gave way to criminal fraud remains uncertain. Some say it began in the early 1990s, when his investment advisory arm, separate from his trading firm, began offering too good to be true returns. Others believe the seeds were planted earlier, perhaps in the 1980s, as he sought to maintain a flawless image during periods of market volatility. Madoff's strategy appeared elegant. He claimed to generate steady profits using a split-strike conversion method, buying stocks, hedging with options, and limiting risk. In reality, he wasn't investing at all. His firm operated as a classic Ponzi scheme, using money from new investors to pay returns to old ones. The deception was stunningly effective. Month after month, his clients received statements showing consistent profits, regardless of market conditions. During crashes, when others lost fortunes, Madoff's investors still earned positive returns. It seemed miraculous, but the illusion worked because Madoff's clients wanted to believe it. He was selective about who could invest. Entry into his fund was seen as a privilege, a mark of sophistication. This exclusivity gave him an aura of legitimacy. Wealthy families, hedge funds, and charities begged to invest with him. Even major banks and financial institutions, including J.P. Morgan Chase, funneled client money into his fund without fully understanding where it went. Madoff's clientele spanned the globe. Celebrities like Steven Spielberg, Nobel laureates, billionaires, and countless retirees. His investors weren't merely customers. They were disciples of his supposed genius. His consistent returns, typically around 10 to 12% annually, seemed modest, but in a volatile market, they represented the holy grail of stability. Behind the scenes, however, Madoff's operation was a house of cards. The investment advisory side of his business was a front. There were no actual trades, no portfolios, no risk strategies. Instead, a small team of loyal employees created fake account statements, fabricated transaction reports, and backdated documents to make everything appear real. The epicenter of the fraud was the 17th floor of the Lipstick Building in Manhattan, a locked, windowless office separate from Madoff's legitimate trading floor. Here, computers generated fake statements for thousands of investors, listing trades that had never happened. To cover redemptions, Madoff used incoming investor money. As long as new funds flowed in, the illusion continued. For years, some skeptics questioned how Madoff consistently outperformed the market. In 2000, financial analyst Harry Markopolos submitted detailed reports to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, mathematically proving that Madoff's returns were impossible. His warning, "The world's largest hedge fund is a fraud," was ignored. The SEC conducted multiple superficial investigations but failed to uncover the truth. It wasn't until December 2008, amid the chaos of the global financial crisis, that the house collapsed. As panicked investors demanded withdrawals, Madoff couldn't sustain the illusion. On December 10, 2008, he confessed to his sons, both senior employees, that his investment advisory business was one big lie. The next day, they alerted authorities, and Madoff was arrested. The numbers were staggering. Investigators estimated that he had defrauded more than 37,000 victims in 136 countries, with losses totaling approximately $65 billion, a figure representing both real money invested and fabricated profits. The actual cash invested was around $17 billion, making it the largest financial fraud ever committed by a single person. The fallout was catastrophic. Charities collapsed, retirement accounts were wiped out, and family fortunes disintegrated overnight. Some victims lost everything they owned. Others took their own lives. Among them was René Magan de la Villehuchet, a French financier who invested heavily with Madoff and died by suicide after the scandal broke. Madoff's arrest also exposed the complicity, or at least the negligence, of regulators, banks, and auditors. How could a fraud of such scale persist for decades under the SEC's nose? The failure led to sweeping reforms in financial oversight, but for many, the damage was irreparable. In March 2009, Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies, including securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and perjury. In June that year, he was sentenced to 150 years in prison, the maximum allowed by law. As he stood before the court, Madoff admitted that he had betrayed his investors, his family, and his profession. His downfall also destroyed his family. His wife, Ruth Madoff, lost nearly all her assets and lived a reclusive life thereafter. His elder son, Mark, hanged himself in 2010 on the second anniversary of Bernie's arrest. His younger son, Andrew, died of cancer in 2014, still publicly blaming his father for the family's destruction. Even behind bars, Madoff remained an object of fascination, a symbol of both greed and systemic failure. He gave interviews expressing remorse but often portrayed himself as a victim of circumstance, insisting that everyone on Wall Street shared the blame for the culture of excess that made his fraud possible. When Bernie Madoff died in prison in April 2021, at age 82, he left behind a legacy unlike any other criminal in history. He hadn't killed or smuggled drugs. He had weaponized trust, exploiting the faith people placed in his reputation and the financial system. Madoff's crime wasn't about the love of money alone. It was about control, power, and the intoxicating thrill of deception. He manipulated not through fear, but through confidence. Investors didn't just trust him, they idolized him. And in the end, that blind faith became his greatest weapon. The Madoff saga remains a cautionary tale about the fragility of financial systems and the dangers of unchecked ambition. His fraud reshaped the investment world, leading to stricter oversight, new regulations, and a cultural reckoning on Wall Street. Yet even today, echoes of Madoff's crime persist. Similar schemes continue to surface across the globe, proving that human greed and the allure of easy returns never truly vanish. Bernie Madoff's empire was built not on violence or intimidation, but on persuasion and illusion. He showed the world that the richest criminals don't always hide in shadows. They sometimes stand in the brightest spotlight, wearing the most convincing smile. And when that smile fades, what remains is not just financial ruin, but a mirror reflecting humanity's endless hunger for wealth, certainty, and belief in the impossible.